Hi, my girl. Hi, sweetie. How's your day? That's good. So this is my niece's room. She shares it with me. That's Emma's side, and this is my side, kind of. But we share this dresser. Right now, I've been here about 4 weeks, and I recently got out of a treatment center, and I struggle with addictions.
There's 6 people. There's me and baby in this room, and then there's my sister and Emma in that room, and then there's Darren and Jeff in that room.
She said I can stay here as long as I want to till I get back on my feet. I never liked that word, like homeless, like, oh, it's so ugly. I don't know. I guess I kind of am in a way.
Research estimates that for every 1 homeless person on the street, there are 3 hidden homeless.
I figured out 4 times in my life I've been homeless. Once with my biological mother, once when I aged out, once when I came back pregnant with Jordan, and then when my marriage fell apart was my last time. My first degree is in child and youth care, and then my next degree is education, sleeping on an air mattress, and I was teaching out on a reserve.
The hidden homeless can be found couch surfing with family, friends, and often strangers. They can also be found filling hospital beds, fleeing domestic violence in motel rooms, attending treatment programs, or serving a jail sentence.
I got pregnant, and my mom kept kicking me out, and I had no place to live. I was just lost and alone, walking with all my bags, and I was just broken inside, like, holy crap. I was just like, what am I fucking gonna do, you know?
Off the street and out of the public eye, there's an entire community of homeless people in Edmonton who are invisible.
Maybe there's problems of finances, there's problems of, a dysfunction of some kind. They have no place to turn.
The Indigenous population in Edmonton is growing faster all the time. As more people migrate to large centers, the pressure to house them increases. Recent studies show that Indigenous people are 9 times more likely to be homeless than the rest of Edmonton's population.
Well, my common law and my daughter, we left the reserve. We had nowhere to go. We bounced from home to home in Edmonton for 3 months, and it was in the wintertime. There was a lot of times when there'd be alcohol and drug use. I don't know, it was rough. I didn't like it. At night I used to just lay there with my baby and on the floor and hold her and cry.
I'm on day pro right now. I'm working for my full parole. I was in a few foster homes in Vancouver because of abuse.
They come from these dysfunctional situations where mom isn't a mom and a dad isn't a dad, or they come from a single mom family, and they really have nothing to turn to.
So I always rebelled, and that led me to my negative peers, out drinking, drugging, stealing cars, getting into trouble, right? So that led me into my crime cycle, my drug cycle, the jail system.
My grandparents were residential kids. They grew up in residential schools, and the intergeneration trauma and stuff, it just passed on to us. And that's all we seen was alcohol and violence growing up. And after a while, it didn't scare me anymore. It was just natural. It was like, oh, whatever.
The intergenerational impacts of colonization have created a generation of young people who probably have not experienced being loved and cared for. Sometimes have lived in very overcrowded situations their entire life. They're one of the herd in a very large ecosystem, living on somebody's couch is absolutely no different than the experience that they've had their entire life, and maybe their mom has had, maybe their grandmother has had.
As the problems from intergenerational trauma mount at home, many Indigenous people decide to leave their communities for the opportunities and support they hope will be available in Edmonton. However, the trauma often stays with them, and only the location has changed.
We all understand the economic issues that face First Nations and METIS settlements. The jobs aren't there, the economic development doesn't exist. On reserve or on settlement, people don't talk about homelessness. It exists. There's couch surfing everywhere. So when they move to Edmonton, they latch on to maybe people that they know.
Stay for one night turns into two nights turns into a week. And, you know, youth particularly can stay at different people's houses, and those houses don't even know how transient they are.
I think couch surfing has put our youth to a place where they're so vulnerable, because I remember talking with a lot of the youth, and they'd tell me, I'm staying at this complete stranger's home. I don't know how it's going to be there from night to night, or I could be at a different person's house. And I don't know how the people are going to be in that house, if they're going to be drinking or using or have expectations of me.
The lack of health and support services on reserve or Métis settlement causes many people to choose to move to Edmonton. This is particularly true when it comes to mental illness.
We were living in Fishing Lake. Jean-Paul was actually doing some yard work for my cousin. As we were talking, red flags started going up, and I was like, oh dear, I think my son is schizophrenic. So he constantly hears the voices. I moved to Edmonton because there was nothing in the area to help him. After he moved out of my home, he moved actually in with his dad for a while. And then his dad got sick and was allowing Jean-Paul to stay in his apartment. And Jean-Paul wasn't stable enough to stay in a home by himself, so he would do things like put chicken on to fry and go lay down and go to sleep. Or he'd have a bunch of people over, and that would cause problems for the apartment. So he ended up getting evicted.
Becoming homeless for personal safety can be a necessity for some Indigenous women as they flee domestic violence.
Why am I in a hotel is because I'm fleeing domestic relationship over a year now. 21 days is what you're given to be placed in a women's shelter. Within those days, if you cannot find a residence to reside in, then you are placed in a hotel. I mean, you know, like I'm here by myself from a small community, moving into a hotel that is pretty much run down, no kitchen.
Homelessness has many teeth, and it's a predator, and it can rip and tear and really hurts people. It comes in many variable sizes and shapes, but it all has that sort of aspect of just not knowing how long that place is going to last.
I was always living in my bag at every foster home that I've been in. I've never really unpacked my bags. They were always packed, and I was just digging through them, and I knew it wasn't gonna last.
I don't have any pictures of me or my kids on the walls. I don't have any decorations. I don't even have my own dresser. Like my niece, like my suitcase is in the basement with my clothes in it. Like I'm still living out of my suitcase. The same suitcase I took with me to treatment, so.
For the longest time, I didn't have a mirror in my room because I didn't like looking at myself. I didn't like who I was. Is a 6x9 cell what I really wanted in my life? Or did I want my family back, my freedom, a sense of who I am?
I wouldn't eat and starve. I knew they didn't have any money. And they were sweet people, they were kind, they would feed me, but it felt like a beggar. I'm gonna go out. I'm gonna walk around Edmonton. I'm gonna find a job. I'm gonna find a place to live. I'm gonna dreaming about having my own home, having my own space, breaking the cycle of poverty.
At summertime, I'd go out late at night and go longboarding all around the city. Eventually, I got to the point where instead of having a place to sleep at, I would stay up all night so many times in a row that I got to the point where my legs got wobbly and I could barely walk.
My sister asked me if I ever sleep. She said I'm like the Energizer bunny that runs on empty because I'd be up at 5 o'clock in the morning and just have like that moment, that time to myself before I start my day. Usually like around 7 o'clock, wake up the kids and then walk them to school, and then I go to my program and I try to fit everywhere where there's a slot, like even just a minute. It's like, who can I spend 20 minutes with, I barely come home for supper, and I always come home like around 10:30.
Felt like an alien in somebody else's home. You don't feel complete. You don't feel grounded. You don't have roots. I'd go on the bus and drive all around the city and get off in Mill Woods and then walk all the way downtown just to kill time.
It's a power imbalance, and it's not malicious all the time, but the people who own the house have all the power. The person who is there provisionally has no power. It's very difficult to self-determine or to raise concerns about safety or what have you when you have no power.
There are times that I called my sister and I wasn't okay to come here because she was protecting her kids because I wasn't sober and doing things that I need to do to get my life on track.
Well, she knows I don't talk to her when she's not sober or clean. Like when she's using or something, I won't talk to her. I'll just keep my distance. I won't even answer her phone calls.
If you don't understand the expectations of that home and aren't able to meet them, or the finances of the home are stressed and can no longer take on another mouth to feed, I think there's huge vulnerability attached to it. It is a step away from the street.
We ended up in the hospital that time, and when he came out, he went to stay with his sister, who was very close to his age as well. And that didn't work that well because she didn't know how to cope with some of his behaviors, and he would bring people home, and then it wasn't a safe environment for her. So another friend tried to, I know somebody, let's stay together here at their place. But every kind of situation didn't work out that long, and so it just was a vicious cycle.
Eventually, options with family usually run out, and the situation gets more desperate, and the options fewer and more risky.
I couldn't sleep because everybody was drinking in the living room, there was fighting going on in the living room. It's always in the back of your head, you're thinking, holy shit, what if I'm sleeping and somebody just freaking all of a sudden just throws himself on me, what am I gonna do? So you can't sleep, but you can sleep, you're half asleep, so you don't get the rest that you need because you're always listening and waiting for something to happen. It's exhausting and tiring, and it just wears you down.
Couch surfing and those really underhoused and really vulnerable, or living in really short-term situations and really compromised situations, are exposed to circumstances that ultimately are eroding them, eroding their ability, their self-worth, their ability to even access resources. If you're couch surfing, you still don't have an address. You still can't access resources others have.
You get this message that you're not worth it. You get this message that you're lower than everyone else.
In addition to suffering from the impacts of intergenerational trauma, Indigenous people also face widespread poverty and racism that is built into the structure of Canadian society and government systems. These realities often cut to the core of an individual's self-esteem and identity.
There was times that I felt ashamed to be a Native. I grew up in a white society most of my life. Sometimes I felt like I didn't belong with them, and sometimes I felt like I didn't belong with the natives, my own people.
I wanted to be white like everybody else, you know. Maybe if I dyed my hair blonde, you know, I would fit in with the white kids. You know, I didn't like myself. I was racist against myself.
For example, I'm many times a reference, renter's reference for many young people and families, and you get on the phone with some of these landlords, and they'll say, well, you know, I'm looking at the last name, and then they kind of whisper it like they don't want anybody hearing, but are they Aboriginal? You know, it's like, you know, and that's a factor. That's a factor that somebody like me, a middle-aged white male, can come knocking up to any rental company, and I'll get a different reaction than somebody that's identical to me except the color of their skin.
Some are racist, judgmental. They don't give you a chance. So the lady just looked at me like, you know, a disgusting look. You know, rolled her eyes and made a face and, "Well, you dirty Indian." No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. We didn't fill out an application. She just said no.
There's so many barriers right now that I'm trying to chop down. I feel that the support system in helping me do that is very limited, especially with the conditions and where you're residing.
I was so lost. I was no place to live, no place to go, broke. I even asked if like social services can help me out and stuff, and they said no, they can't. I told them I had no place to live and I was, you know, pregnant, and they're like, well, sorry, we can't help you. You're out of our jurisdiction.
And then we see what's going on with the missing and murdered Indigenous women across Canada. There's two forms of oppression that collide. There's the misogyny of the Western society, and then there's colonization and colonial assumptions. And it seems like Indigenous women get the full brunt of both of those things. There's a lot of blaming the victim.
The hidden homeless often spend their time languishing within government systems such as income support. The fact that they are currently sheltered is a short-term benefit that often prevents them from accessing housing programs and mental health services offered to the homeless on the street.
Housing workers, they'll give you papers to fill out, or else they'll redirect you to other agencies that will redirect you to other agencies. And it's like, there's not really a housing agency that knows exactly what to do from the ones that I dealt with. They give me paperwork to fill out, but then it's like, oh, well, this one's a really long list, this one's a really long list. Like, I'm just burning out trying to keep busy, and it's like, I'm supposed to be filling out papers and this and that and everything, but then it's like, I don't even think I fit half of the criteria because I'm technically not homeless because I don't live on the street. I live with my sister.
You know, it's not surprising to me that so many workers within government become so jaded. They are constantly having to say no, or they're constantly, you know, and how do we support the entire system so that actually we don't have hurt people trying to help hurt people?
And I think in general, it's kind of everybody's burnt. They're burnt out. They're tired. Everything is work. You're another intake, or you're another you're another person that stayed there for a moment in time, but you're gone again. They don't get the compassion.
Working with a mom with 6 children. She and her 6 children had to be put up in a motel for 9 months because you just can't find a place for 6 children. And they had to put them into 2 motel rooms. It was $8,800 a month they were spending on this family of 6. And part of the reason they spent so long in this motel is the workers wouldn't give them any bus tickets to go look for a place because they were spending so much money for what? For a lot of misery and confusion. It's like the hands of the drowning, trying to save the hands of the drowning. It's just this big flailing mess We just can't cut through all of that fog and get to the issue, which is there's not enough resources.
We don't have enough, but I would say even more than not having enough, services have really lagged in terms of the kind of support we're talking about right now. You know, understanding trauma, intergenerational trauma, really very little understanding.
I'm tired of hearing the word reconciliation because nobody understands it. You can't put Band-Aids on a situation and not deal with it. There's consequences to pay. The old people tell us that. Take the hardest route.
We look at the immediate cost, you know, and we don't look at that in terms of an investment. We don't look at all these hidden costs for letting the problems go on, or the potential cost to the next generation. Instead of looking at it in terms of investment in this family, investing in a community, investing in a nation.
The answer to that issue, the most economic way to deal with it, is provide supports for the family. If housing is the issue, provide housing. If mental health is the issue, help parents get the support that they need. But then they come up against the yeah buts. Yeah, but we can't give people housing because then where's my housing? That's not fair. If you're going to give it to them, how come I have to pay for my own? We know better. We have research, we have lived experience, we know what we need to do. We're afraid to do it. We're afraid to support families in meaningful ways because we label those families as lazy, as broken. We label them as abusing the system.
Sometimes it's like a high-pitched stress. People tone out, right? And getting to Albertans so that they understand how broken things are and how possible and how we could do something so differently and really save money.
I don't think we as Albertans or we as Canadians really want to put the work into the situation to the degree that it needs to. So when things do happen, you'll see the results of that hard work. That's what reconciliation is. It's long-term thinking for long-term healing.
The only reconciliation most people are interested in is everybody else change. The moment that reconciliation means I have to change or I have to sacrifice, all of a sudden we get a lot of defensiveness, a lot of resistance. And that's why we're very comfortable dealing with the immediate crises and the symptom of the problem, but dealing with the root causes of the problem is really difficult because the root causes means every single Canadian gets to look at ourselves. And how are we participating in that? You know, not necessarily consciously or maliciously, but how is this all set up that we have some people who cannot do anything about their circumstance? And what happens is we wind up spending a heck of a lot more in apprehension and incarceration than we would have if we would have just housed a family.
Home. That's all I thought it was, a home.